Welcome back into another rectangular table discussion. This time we're not talking about Star Wars, but this time we are talking about the movie Wonder Woman 1984. This was a movie that I've mostly seen negative reviews on so far ever since it was aired. My special guest co-host seemed to think otherwise. Wherever you're listening, give a warm welcome and start clapping for Eric.
Hi.
Eric, you seem to like the movie a lot more than what a lot of comments I'm reading online. Do you want to talk about what made you like it so much and what were your favorite parts of the movie?
I thought it was an enjoyable movie. Some of the 80s stuff was a little forced and a little too much of it, but that was a good nostalgia thing, I guess, for people that would have grown up in the 80s. And I think they tried to recapture some of the campiness and kookiness of the Superman movies that were out during that time. My favorite thing about the movie, or the thing I'm most excited about that I haven't actually heard anyone talking about, is that the Dreamstone is Morpheus' Dreamstone from Sandman. And I think they do have the Sandman project in the works, which will probably tie back to this.
Did you have a favorite character from the movie?
Probably Cheetah's the best character in the movie.
I would definitely have to agree. I wasn't a big fan of the movie, but I will say I thought Kristen Wiig was good as per usual, and I thought that character was pretty good. Personally, I didn't think the acting was very good at all. I thought Pedro Pascal was one of the worst elements of the whole movie. I think it felt too much like a soap opera, and it felt like they wanted every moment to feel like it was the end of the world, and it seemed like everything was so over-dramatized to me.
See, I actually think it was a step down from the melodramatic and over dramatization of the Zack Snyder era of DC movies, or the Nolan era of DC movies. I think they're trying to move more toward the comic-y, whimsical, more like the Marvel balance of more goofiness. The balance that the Ninja Turtle movies had way back in the 90s of there's some action and then there's some goofiness and then there's some schmaltziness and they juggle it all.
I just didn't think the acting performances were very believable, particularly by Pedro Pascal. I almost wonder if his performance in this is going to have any effect on future negotiations for The Mandalorian.
I kind of figured that the whatever scandal behind the scenes of Mandalorian was about Wonder Woman 94, was about a scheduling conflict maybe, or maybe it was I'm about to be a big movie star, you better put me in the more and whatever. I think the effects have already happened from whatever conflict.
So if you were going to rank Wonder Woman 1984 out of 10, what would you give it out of 10?
I'd give it an 8 something. Between an 8 and a 9.
8.4.
Let's go with that.
I think it was maybe slightly better than Justice League, but having recently watched Justice League again, I didn't think it was as bad the second time as I thought it was the first time. Where would you rank this Wonder Woman 1984 compared to the other DCU movies?
I mean, probably overall, it wouldn't have been as good as the first Wonder Woman, and it probably got away with a lot of stuff because of the success of the first Wonder Woman. Ares ended up being ridiculous in the first Wonder Woman, which is seen pretty universally as the low point of that movie. And Pedro Pascal was very, very cartoonish. The 80s Superman movies, they were all kind of cartoonish and over the top like that. So I don't think it's necessarily out of place, but it does kind of feel a little ridiculous at parts.
Well, so did you think that it was better than Dawn of Justice and Justice League? Did you think it was better than Man of Steel?
Yes.
So you think that Wonder Woman 1 and Wonder Woman 1984 are number 1 and 2 out of all the DC movies that they've done recently?
They probably are the most solid from the Snyderverse era.
Personally, my main gripe with Wonder Woman 1984 was that I didn't like the acting, which I've kind of mentioned now. I didn't really like how it was edited. It seemed like there were a lot of continuity errors, and it seemed like there were a lot of liberties taken with how I think they just assume you're going to put it together, and they didn't really follow through on a lot of stuff they showed. Towards the end, she put the lasso of truth on Pedro Pascal, and then all of a sudden he just kind of walks away, and all of a sudden the lasso of truth isn't wrapped around him anymore. That seemed kind of convenient. I really just didn't think there was that much depth to the movie. It felt like a lot of convoluted drama that was over-dramatized, a lot of filler, and a lot of just excuses to put Chris Pine in the movie. That was another thing that kind of bothered me, is I felt like the vessel that Chris Pine's soul, or whatever, the Steve guy, I felt like the vessel that he was put in when she wished for him to return, I thought that new actor should have just been able to portray Steve. I thought that would have made a lot more sense. I definitely get why they made it Chris Pine, because it was like the audience is seeing him as what Diana sees.
There are movies that have done that before. Did you see, like, the Chris Rock remake of Heaven Can Wait, where, like, he dies, but he comes back to life in the body of, like, an old white dude? And it shows him as Chris Rock the whole time until he, like, looks in the mirror, and then you see the old white dude.
Well, they did kind of allude to that, too, like how she was seeing him as Chris Pine, and then he looks in the mirror, and it's that other guy.
Everybody else would have been seeing him as the other guy, yeah. For the sake of the plot and the story, you're seeing Steve Trevor. And a lot of the reviews were saying, like, oh, the Chris Pine dynamic is the best part, like, their chemistry is the best part of the movie. I didn't think that, like, it definitely didn't detract for me for that.
It was also kind of inconsistent how she was using her rope, like, swinging through the air like Spider-Man, and then all of a sudden she could fly, but I was pretty sure she was flying in the Wonder Woman movie before, which was supposedly taking place in, like, the 40s. So I don't know, like, why all of a sudden she wasn't flying. Eventually I got why she was injured by a bullet shot. Like, they said that her wishing for Steve made her powers go away, and that was, like, the thing she wanted most, or the thing that she desired most. But at the same time, it's like the thing that she desired most was Steve. That doesn't really make that much sense, because she wished for Steve, and they made a big deal about how that was what she wanted more than anything. So your wish comes at a cost, where you lose the thing you want more than anything by being granted the thing that you want more than anything.
It just says it comes at a cost and it doesn't tell you. Magic logic doesn't really have to hold up because it's magic. It'll give you the thing you on your face want the most, but at a cost that it won't even tell you what that is. Like the monkey's paw, like they kept saying.
It seemed like they repeatedly said in the movie, and that was ultimately like the undoing of Pedro Pascal, is it's like you get the one wish, but it comes at the cost of what you want more than anything. Or like what you love more than anything is what the cost. And so he was kind of blinded to the fact that his biggest desire was his son Alistair.
I think his biggest desire was power. He wanted to become the Wishing Stone so that he could grant wishes in exchange for whatever he wanted. But it was coming at a cost to, like, his health or his soul or whatever. So he thought that he could keep, like, outwitting the magic of it by, like, keep continuing to grant wishes and take as he gave. That's why he was desperately trying to find wishes he could grant in exchange for taking whatever he wanted.
It felt very inconsistent. Like, she wanted Steve more than anything, but then her rescinding her wish of wanting Steve was kind of like what undid her losing her power. But it seems like she didn't value her powers that much. It seemed like she just kind of had them, and she uses her power for good because she happens to have her powers. But it seemed like the whole point was they were trying to drive home how really the only thing she valued was having Steve. And so losing Steve was kind of what undid it. So that seems kind of inconsistent that she lost her powers to get her wish when she didn't really care that much about her powers in the first place. I also just felt like her power level were inconsistent throughout the movie. It felt like she should have been flying. I mean, it was definitely an excuse to make her use the rope like spider webs. I definitely get that. But that just seems like, why would she do that if she can fly? And I was pretty sure it's been established that she could fly in the last movie, which was in the 40s.
I think she's like strong so she can jump high, but can't necessarily fly. But like the comics have been very, very inconsistent depending on who's writing over the course of like 80 years or whatever.
And you mentioned earlier when we were talking about it before recording that you think that she might not have known that she can fly yet. Which I guess that makes sense, but I could have sworn that she was flying in the final fight against Ares in the first one, which again was prior to this in the 80s, so she would have learned that skill. And they also were kind of inconsistent with the lasso of truth, how it can like split off into like multiple lassos.
It feels more like a tentacle in this one than it ever did before, yeah. Like it's sentient.
It was almost like they made her lasso of truth like the cloak of levitation that Doctor Strange has, where it kind of has a mind of its own and it can split off into several ropes and it can contort into like a small enough lasso hole size to catch bullets.
Magic can do whatever you want it to.
All of a sudden her little headband thing is like Captain America's shield.
She could do the boomerang, well, not in the Snyder movies, but in Wonder Woman, she can do that. She could do it before. But it also gave her like flash speed sometimes and then sometimes didn't.
They did a lot of callbacks to the Christopher Reeves Supermans, which I think you appreciated. I think that's something that a lot of people probably didn't like and felt slow. I made the comment that it felt to me like it was exactly like those Christopher Reeve Superman movies, just with slightly better technology. It really did seem to be a lot of her kind of...
I think they even used a camera filter to recreate the look of that era of Superman movies, too.
It felt like there was a lot of time frame filler with her just aimlessly flying around and floating around like it did with those.
I've read some stuff on this too, and I think part of that is deliberate because they're trying to get back to a more like inspirational and uplifting tone for superhero movies. They don't want it to be like grim and cynical and dark and like you gotta kill everybody and it's gotta be as violent as you want. They're trying to make it cutesy again a little bit.
I think the core audience doesn't want that, though. I definitely get what you're saying. They want it to be kind of like a fable. They want it to be like something that 5, 6, 7 kids, impressionable kids that are like 10 or so, I think they want them to be able to take some sort of lesson out of it. Also, like, they want it to be, I guess, audience appropriate for younger kids. I think the main demographic that's going to be subscribed to HBO Max and is going to watch this is going to be more so people that like very cynical and dark things, though. I think a lot of comic book fans, and I think that's kind of the tone of how society is now. I think a lot of people like very dark and
well, that's what
cynical.
Zack Snyder thought, too.
I think that's going to be what the biggest detriment was, because I think the core audience or the main people that would be interested in seeing this aren't that into forced uplifting messages kind of thing.
I think that's why they keep rebooting these stories, and these characters have had different eras where they go back and forth. Look at, like, Adam West Batman, and then look at, like, Christopher Nolan Batman. Like, Dracula and Frankenstein can be whatever you want them to be. They can be on cereal boxes now. But they are specific characters from specific books. You just reinterpret these people to teach whatever lesson you want or make whatever point you want. Freddie Prinze Jr. is right in his rant about oh well, Star Wars isn't supposed to make sense. Fiction isn't really there to make sense or be realistic. It's supposed to make a point or teach a lesson or say have a message. The message is usually more important than the logistics of it.
I think human nature wants to make things make sense, though.
That's very true. And that's why there should be, continuity within a story. The way you're saying that there's, inconsistencies and, things are just supposed to make sense because you know who these characters are, that was even worse in, Batman vs. Superman. And in, the Justice League movie. It's oh, yeah, of course they do that because they're them.
I just think that this movie was very sloppily edited. It just seemed like there was a lot of inconsistencies and cuts that they expected you to put together what happened without actually showing you that actually happened. It felt kind of lazy with how it was edited, and I just, again, wasn't a huge fan of the acting, especially Pedro Pascal. I thought he was particularly terrible. It felt kind of similar to the Tobey Maguire Spider-Mans, how like every other scene somebody was crying or somebody was very like obviously emotionally conflicted on their face, on the brink of tears kind of thing. I did kind of like the action in the beginning. I did kind of like the Themyscira Olympics. I thought those scenes were kind of cool. Some people were saying they could have easily cut 5 minutes out of that and they would have gotten the point. I thought that was probably the coolest part of the movie,
that
though.
shows that, like, yeah, Batman's a guy that, like, trained really hard. It turns out everyone on Themyscira trains like Batman, just because. Wonder Woman's kind of underrated because she's, like, the best of Superman mishmashed with, like, the best of Batman. She's got, like, the power and idealism of a Superman and, like, the tactical skills and the training of a Batman. To what you're saying with filler, I think a lot of... And they've kind of moved away from that in the past couple of decades, but, like, old issues of X-Men are very soap opera-y, and it will show issues of just them, like, them hanging out at Xavier Mansion playing baseball out in the yard, or, like, going shopping, and, like, going out on dates and stuff. Like, they're trying to make these characters relatable.
I think the major criticism that I've seen from a lot of people is that the movie just wasn't very fulfilling for how long it was. I think it might have been better if they cut out some stuff. I also think you're right, as I think the expectations from how good the first one ended up being made people expect this to be a better movie. The first Wonder Woman seemed way better than it really was just because of how bad some of the other ones have been perceived. As far as my rankings, I would say this is probably in the top 3 or 4. I actually think I like Batman vs. Superman a little bit better, and I think, looking back, I think I probably like the first Wonder Woman better. I think this movie might be slightly better than Justice League, but at the same time, the Justice League movie did have... There were a lot more chances to like something about it just because there was so much happening at once. Wonder Woman 1 and this one were definitely better than Aquaman, I'd say, and I don't really remember liking Man of Steel that much. I remember that one being kind of boring. If you pitted this Wonder Woman 1984 up against some of the MCU or some of the recent MCU, where would you say it stacks up against those?
I mean, it's kind of hard to take the MCU stuff on its own. Like, the cool thing about the MCU was that it built on itself and was serialized like a comic book, and there's more of those. I think the Guardians of the Galaxy movies go over the top with, like, being... They kind of go too far in the goofiness direction. And I think, like, the Iron Man sequels were kind of lazy because there was just like, hey, we've got Robert Downey Jr. You're going to watch this, right? I think I liked Thor 2 a lot. Everybody says Thor 2 is, like, the worst Marvel movie ever. But, like, it's the one that's a actual Thor movie. The first time I saw Thor 1, it was even going too far in the snarky, like, oh, we swear we're not nerds. We're making fun of it too. Don't beat us up. And then 3 did that again, but it kind of pulled it off better, and it's like, okay, I get what you're doing now.
Thor Ragnarok was very well received, I think. I think that's a lot of people's favorite. I think a lot of people like Thor Ragnarok better than even Infinity War and Endgame, really. Some people have Thor Ragnarok as the best because Thor Ragnarok did a good job of meeting that balance of action and comedy and not overly dramatic, but not overly making fun of everything. I think they thought it was a healthy mixture.
Marvel has they've perfected the juggling act, and like the 2 latest Avengers movies do the same. They juggle the action and like the melodramatic stuff and then like the goofiness.
Obviously, Endgame and Infinity War weren't anywhere close to how that actual story unfolded. Do you think this Wonder Woman 1984 was at all close or not really?
So they cherry pick stuff from like decades and decades of stuff, and they offer a lot. Like, I think the Wisteria armor is like her Kingdom Come armor that they like put in because it looked cool. So like the Superman snapping Zod's neck, I think in Man of Steel, is based on Wonder Woman snapping Maxwell Lord's neck in like the early aughts because he had like mind control powers at the time. But I think they purposely made Maxwell Lord out to be like a Art of the Deal era Donald Trump for this movie because he is a reviled figure in current.
I kind of buy what you're saying because they did make him have like blondish looking hair too, kind of similar style. I didn't really think about that the first time I watched it, but I guess I can see where people would get that idea. The only difference I would say is that Donald Trump is kind of famous for firing people on The Apprentice, and it seemed like Maxwell Gold was hiring everybody he could get his hands on because he needed all these different people working for him. So that's kind of a little bit different because he was desperate to hire people rather than iconically fire people.
I think all the "you're hireds" are a specific riff on the "you're fired" catchphrase. Another difference is that Maxwell Lord is lessened by the end of the movie.
How different do you think the Snyder Cut's going to be from the Justice League movie that we got in 2017?
I don't know, because, well, apparently it's gonna have Darkseid. They say it's supposed to be a lot longer, but the Justice League movie, I didn't really bother watching when it was in theaters, and it's not as bad as I was expecting it to be, and, like, a little darker than I was expecting it to be.
Is it safe to say that you like this Wonder Woman more than Justice League, though?
Yeah.
Is it your second favorite one behind the first Wonder Woman? Are those your number one and number two favorites out of all the DCU movies?
Probably. And I think, like, even Aquaman is better than, like, Batman vs. Superman and, like, Man of Steel to me, and Justice League. But that was mostly because of all the, like, kooky fish and stuff, and, like, it looked cool.
I wasn't a huge fan of Aquaman. I think I probably liked Batman vs. Superman more than a lot of people did. Partially because I'm not a big Superman fan, and so that showed him, quote-unquote, dying. I also kind of liked how, even though his plan was very contingent on Superman just not being like, hey, Lex wants us to fight, I kind of liked how he was very calculated and deliberate in making Batman have a bone to pick with Superman. I kind of liked how his plan pitted them against each other. I kind of liked the careful planning and calculation that went into that. I guess I appreciated that. The fight scene between the two of them, Batman and Superman, I thought was cool. And then I also thought that the conflict with Wonder Woman, Batman, Superman, and Doomsday was pretty cool. So I guess I probably liked that the most. And again, DC didn't really set the bar very high. I definitely think I like the Marvel ones overall more.
I still think Lex Luthor is more annoying as a villain than Pedro Pascal was.
Is that just because of the casting choice, or do you just think the character...
The way he played it in the movie was... And it's probably kind of on purpose that he was annoying like that. I like him how he is in the comics, where he's like a serious businessman type guy who's smarter than everybody.
Well, he did play him smarter than everybody, but I guess I kind of get what you're saying. He did kind of have an ornery aspect to him and a little bit temperamental. I guess sort of childish.
And I think that was on purpose, because to make him like spoiled Silicon Valley trust fund baby.
It might have also just been an excuse to get Jesse Eisenberg as a cast. Lex is generally older than him as an actor. That's a face that I think a lot of people that are in their mid-teens to like mid to late 30s and 40s would recognize.
Hey, I know that guy from Zombieland.
Yeah, or even Now You See Me or whatever. And he's also in The Social Network where he plays kind of the
He's
same...
also real life Lex Luthor.
He plays Mark Zuckerberg, who's obviously kind of similar to Lex Luthor in some ways. So I think it was a little bit just an excuse to get him because he's recognizable. They wanted to kind of do the MCU thing where they get recognizable actors to play these characters. Again, I didn't hate this Wonder Woman movie. I just thought the acting was really bad. That was my main gripe. And again, there was just a lot of continuity and editing inconsistencies, I felt. That might not be as much of an issue for people that don't have a background in editing and looking for stuff like that.
Sloppy editing and continuity are kind of par for DCEU movies at this point, I feel like. I don't feel like Wonder Woman was any worse than the past few have been. They're all better than Suicide Squad, that's for sure.
I think I'll put it just after the first Wonder Woman. So I think I'll put Batman vs. Superman ahead of it, and I think I would put the first Wonder Woman ahead of it, and then I would go Wonder Woman 1984, probably Justice League, then probably Aquaman and Man of Steel were both pretty terrible in my opinion, so that one's hard to say.
The cool, fresh thing about Man of Steel when it came out was that like you finally got to see Superman doing action stuff. It's mostly just him like floating around in the old ones. That was a chance for him to like use some of his superpowers and like people that he could use superpowers on.
I wasn't alive when the Christopher Reeve Superman movies came out, so I don't really know how they were received at the time.
The very first one is still lauded as like one of the best superhero movies of all time.
They did make an awful lot of those Christopher Reeve Superman movies. And then in 2006, they made Superman Returns or whatever that had a different actor. That movie largely felt like the same thing, just with like maybe slightly better technology. I think I said this earlier in the podcast, but in case I didn't, this Wonder Woman 1984 definitely did feel a lot like those Superman movies with better technology. So some of the flying around and effects are a lot more believable now that they have millions or billions of dollars worth of technology upgrades. There just wasn't a whole lot of substance to the movie, in my opinion. Some of the action scenes were cool. I did like the fight scene with Cheetah. I thought that was okay. I mean, the stuff in the mall early on in the movie I thought was just okay, but I also again thought it was dumb that she was using the lasso of truth like spider webs instead of just using her flight. That seemed like she conveniently felt like she forgot how to fly at that moment just to have a cool lasso of truth effect. And that goes back to, again, some of just the inconsistencies. It seems like she conveniently forgets that she has certain powers at convenient times for the plot.
That's a very in keeping with comic books and comic book characters thing to happen.
Yeah, so overall, I guess I'd probably give it like a 5 or a 6. Like, it wasn't terrible. I could probably watch it again. Like, it's not like I would never watch it again, but at the same time, it wasn't my favorite. You gave it an 8.4. I'll give it like somewhere between a 5 and a 6. I did want to say at the end that I did appreciate them doing a callback to the original Wonder Woman in the end credits scene. If you're one of those people that watched it and didn't expect there to be some sort of end credits scene, then definitely go back and see that, because those audience members that may have watched that Wonder Woman show that probably aired in the 80s, that was a cool callback, and I recognized that and definitely appreciated it for what it was. That also is sort of a callback to Marvel and some of these other superhero type movies opening the wormhole of different dimensions kind of thing. They sort of alluded to that in her limited dialogue. So I did want to put that in there for as many, I guess, issues I had with the Wonder Woman movie, the 1984, the sequel. I didn't love it, but I did appreciate that, and I did like some aspects of it.